I will be reading Isaiah 61, verses 1 through 7 from the New International Version. We've all been reading Exodus in preparation for this weekend, but if you keep reading, you'll find that Israel eventually became a great and powerful nation. But in their greatness, they forgot their God. They forgot their calling. And once again, they found themselves in captivity, this time in Babylon rather than Egypt. During that time of exile, God spoke these words through the prophet Isaiah to a people filled with sadness and fear. Hear the word of the Lord. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. Strangers will shepherd your flocks. Foreigners will work your fields and vineyards, and you will be called priests of the Lord. You will be named ministers of our God. You will feed on the wealth of nations, and in their riches you will boast. Instead of your shame, you will receive a double portion, and instead of disgrace, you will rejoice in your inheritance. And so you will inherit a double portion in your land, and everlasting joy will be yours. Maybe you've heard of it. In the beginning of Exodus, the Israelites were slaves in Egypt. They were poor. They had no power, no hope. But God called them. They were called God's children. They were called out of slavery. But they spent 40 years in the wilderness because they were still afraid to trust God. If you keep reading past Exodus, you find that Israel became a great and powerful nation. But in their greatness, they forgot their God. They forgot their calling. And once more, they found themselves in captivity. Speaking through the prophet Isaiah, God gives a word of hope to these people who thought God had forgotten them, just as they had forgotten God. This good news was that God had not forgotten. They didn't have to be afraid to trust God. Years later, Jesus was born. He grew to manhood, was baptized, and was led into the wilderness for 40 days and nights. His story starts a lot like Israel's, but he was not afraid to trust God. Luke 4, verses 16 to 21 tells us what happened when he returned from the wilderness. Hear the word of the Lord. He went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. He began by saying to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." In case you're wondering, these were the same words that Isaiah had spoken to the Israelite captives. When Jesus spoke these words and said that they were fulfilled, he was saying that that day, the day Isaiah was talking about, was this day, the day the people were living. He was telling the people exactly what he was here on earth to do. And not only that, but Jesus was saying that he was fulfillment of God's great promise. The promise to remember, to save the people, to once again call them out of captivity. So my brothers and I have been doing something called the 4 things every morning since I was in kindergarten. Dad asks, "What are we going to do today?" And we reply, "Today I will pay attention. Today I will be Jesus. Today I will see Jesus. Today I will mess up. And Then we say the Lord's Prayer together. When we say pay attention, we mean look at your surroundings. It means to notice what's going on, like a boy sitting by himself at a lunch table, or a girl playing by herself on the playground, or even someone being bullied. When we see one of those things, we do something about it. That may be playing with someone, sitting with them, or standing up for them. And that is a big part of what we mean by saying, I will be Jesus. We don't just notice, but we notice and we act. And when we pay attention, it isn't just to the bad things. We're paying attention so that we can see Jesus. I don't mean that Jesus himself comes walking down the hall. We see Jesus in the people around us. Because we're looking for Jesus, we try to treat everyone as if they were Jesus. We appreciate them, respect them, and look for the best in them. It's always easiest to see Jesus in someone you know and like, but we try to see Jesus in even our enemies. And if we can do that, then we can see Jesus in anyone, and we have a very hard time hating anyone. I say try, because today I will mess up. That doesn't mean we have to mess up, or try to mess up, just that we're probably going to. Yes, we mess up, but we never give up. And we remind each other about that each day too. After the 4 things and the Lord's Prayer, one of us will ask, what happens when we face a challenge? We reply, when faced with a challenge, I can choose my attitude, I can look for an opportunity, we can find a way forward together. We say and do these things because we believe that we are called by God, to be like God, and to do what God does. And what does God do? What did God tell Moses and the Israelites in Exodus? What did God tell the people through Isaiah? What did Jesus say in the synagogue that day? Over and over, God remembers us. God remembers the poor, the forgotten, the captives. God is fixing the stuff that is broken and messed up in this world. And there's something else that God has been doing all along. God has been inviting us, each of us, all of us, to join in the stuff God is doing. The time of fear is over. We've been called out. It's time to pay attention.